What's good? It's Woog. We have a very good light heavyweight title fight coming up, and there's a decent chance that one of the division's kings might get knocked off. We've got Artur Beterbiev, 19 wins and 0 losses, and that's 19 wins with 19 knockouts, defending his WBC, IBF, and WBO light heavyweight titles against Callum Smith, 29 wins and 1 loss. That 1 loss is a decision loss to Canelo Alvarez. Callum Smith is a former WBA super middleweight champion. Now, in this division's recent history, we transition from what I consider to be the Adonis Stevenson, Sergey Kovalev era that was later invaded, or should I say disrupted, by Andre Ward when he beat Sergey Kovalev, and then Alexander Gvozdyk knocked off Adonis Stevenson. So when it was the Adonis Stevenson, Sergey Kovalev, or you could flip those, Sergey Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson era, we never got the super fight in the division that boxing needed, that the fight fans desperately wanted. We never got that fight. And fast forward a few years, this era of light heavyweight has been the Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol era. And at this point, we have not gotten that fight. Now, I do suspect that if Beterbiev gets past Callum Smith, that with some Saudi Arabian involvement, we can get Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol. Maybe not as its own headliner, but I could see that being like the co-main event of one of these large heavyweight bouts. But sometimes as fight fans, I feel like we get too locked into our idea of how the division's supposed to go. Because of the pecking order, we tend to look at the state of things as being something that's going to have some inertia, something that's not going to get knocked off or rocked or disrupted anytime soon. But I always say, be careful when you take these things for granted, because we might think that Dmitry Bivol is going to continue winning until he fights Beterbiev, and that Beterbiev is going to continue winning until he fights Dmitry Bivol. But any step of the way, everything could get disrupted. Remember, once upon a time, it was looking inevitable that Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua were going to lock horns until we saw Anthony Joshua get stopped by Andy Ruiz. And then we saw Deontay Wilder get stopped twice by Tyson Fury. And then more recently, we thought that they were going to lock horns finally. And then what did we get with Joseph Parker upsetting Deontay Wilder? This is the fight game. Nothing is guaranteed. And I'm not totally convinced that we will ever see Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol, but I do think that we are probably one fight away from potentially getting that light heavyweight super fight between those two. But standing in the way is Callum Smith, again, the former super middleweight WBA champion, who was holding that title at the time when, you know, the 168-pound champs were Callum Smith, WBA champ. At the time, the WBC champ twice was David Benavidez, with Anthony Durrell holding the belt for a little bit in between. But David Benavidez, we had Billy Joe Saunders, and before Billy Joe Saunders, it was Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez holding that WBO 168-pound title. And then it was Caleb Plant holding the IBF title, and before Caleb Plant, it was Uskata guy. But yeah, Callum Smith was one of those 168-pound champions who weren't fighting each other until Canelo stormed the gates and started knocking off those champions one by one. And obviously, he never fought David Benavidez because David Benavidez lost his WBC belt without losing a fight. So by beating Callum Smith, Canelo was able to scoop up 2 of those 168-pound titles, the WBA held by Callum Smith and a vacant WBC 168-pound title. But here we have Artur Beterbiev, one of boxing's most destructive forces. I love using that phrase, destructive force. That truly is what Artur Beterbiev has been. Again, 19 wins, 19 knockouts. versus Callum Smith. And this fight, by the way, is going to take place in Quebec City, Canada. And I was actually, one of my vacations, I mean, I didn't take a ton of vacations. One of, we'll say 2 vacations in 2023 was to Montreal and to Quebec City, Canada. And, you know, to New Yorkers, that's not much because it's, you know, like Toronto. Montreal's not far from New York City, but from Southern California, Montreal is like halfway to Europe, basically. And it was a beautiful trip. I mean, Quebec City and Montreal, beautiful slice of the world right there. And Artur Beterbiev, although he's of Dagestani Russian heritage, Dagestan, that's the same region that Khabib Nurmagomedov, the former UFC lightweight champion, hails from. That's where Artur Beterbiev is from, but Artur Beterbiev for the last several years has resided in Montreal, Canada. But again, Artur Beterbiev, one of boxing's most destructive forces, first held the IBF title, and that was around 2017. Around the same time, Dmitry Bivol earned his WBA title. So both of these guys, both Beterbiev and Bivol, have been champions for like over a half a decade each by now. And Artur Beterbiev, he was just rolling through opponents. Enrico Colling. He beat Callum Johnson, although he suffered a knockdown in that fight against the hard-hitting Callum Johnson. And then he had one more fight against Kalajdzic, and then he fought a title unification fight against Alexander Gvozdyk, as I mentioned before, the guy who knocked off, or eventually knocked off, Adonis Stevenson, who was the longtime WBC champion. So that's how Artur Beterbiev, by beating Gvozdyk in a very good fight, that was an excellent fight and a fight worth rewatching from October 2019. Teddy Atlas was actually Gvozdyk's trainer at that time. And Gvozdyk has since, years later, made a comeback. He had retired after that stoppage loss to Beterbiev, but that Beterbiev versus Gvozdyk fight, very competitive. Gvozdyk boxed very well in the first few rounds, but you could see that as Beterbiev started to roll downhill, started to pick up steam, that the pressure and the power started to get to Gvozdyk, and it slowly broke him. Beterbiev ended up winning a 10th round stoppage, and then, you know, COVID hit. Beterbiev was out of the ring for like over a year. He returned to the ring to fight Adam Dinas, stopped him in the 10th. He then fought Marcus Brown, stopped him in the 9th round. That was a pretty good fight as well. Beterbiev suffered a really bad cut due to a head clash, but Brown fought pretty well, won a couple of those rounds. Beterbiev actually started to rally back and then stopped Marcus Brown in the 9th. And then Beterbiev fought Joe Smith Jr. to then unify the WBO light heavyweight title, and that fight was pretty shocking. I think that a lot of people thought that Joe Smith could give Beterbiev a run for his money, but you saw a different side of Beterbiev's game, in my opinion. By taking a step back, moving laterally, he let Joe Smith come to him. Joe Smith was the bull in the china shop. I mean, often you see Beterbiev, the aggressor, throwing those hard, short hooks with both hands and getting his opponents out of there that way. Nah, in this case, he let Joe Smith Jr. come to him, and he started to kind of stop and pop as Joe Smith would kind of reach with the jab too much and keep that jab hand out a little too long. Beterbiev would just catch him cleanly with the counter, drop Joe Smith to a knee at the end of the first round, I believe. And that was the beginning of the end. The second round was all Beterbiev, dropped him multiple times, stopped Joe Smith Jr. in the second round. That might have been the most, well, damn, types of performances I've ever seen from Beterbiev, even though, I mean, he's got a lot of those performances. Even when he beat Gvozdyk, it was like, man, this is a pretty indestructible force here. And then Beterbiev fought Anthony Yarde, and that was a pretty competitive fight. And again, each step of the way, you're wondering, when will this be too much for Beterbiev? Because he's now 38 years old. So he's been, you know, fighting elite fighters while he was in his mid and late 30s, and he beat Anthony Yarde. He stopped him in the 8th round, but the first few rounds in that fight were pretty interesting and competitive. Anthony Yarde brings a totally different skill set than Joe Smith Jr. does. Joe Smith Jr. brings a different skill set than Marcus Brown did, than Alexander Gvozdyk did. But Beterbiev is finding a way to win all these fights, and not only win the fights, but again, stopping each and every one of his opponents. So Beterbiev holds 3 of the 4 belts in this division. The only belt he doesn't have is that belt, the WBA belt, that's held by Dimitri Bivol. Callum Smith, again, he was a longtime WBA 168-pound champion. Although he didn't fight, other than George Groves, he wasn't fighting the other elite 168-pound guy. So I can't really say with any certainty that he was a top 1 or even top 2 fighter in the division. I wanted to see him fight Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, but we just didn't get those unification fights. But we did get Canelo, again, going to 168 and fighting Callum Smith. At the time, I thought Callum Smith was going to be hell on Canelo. I was like, damn, Canelo, after having that contractual dispute with Golden Boy, that 2020 inactivity, returned to the ring at the end of 2020, and he ended up more or less dominating Callum Smith. And I was pretty blown away by that. Again, I thought Callum Smith was going to be very competitive there. And to be fair, Callum Smith's fight before Canelo was kind of controversial. He had beaten John Ryder in a unanimous decision win, where most of us who were watching that fight live, I thought John Ryder should have earned that decision win. I thought John Ryder was getting into the pocket, was landing the better shots, was doing more work than Callum Smith, and it was clearly a John Ryder style fight. And Callum Smith never really got into his groove in that one. He didn't badly hurt John Ryder, and usually if Callum Smith is hitting you cleanly, he's hurting you and often stopping you. Like, he's a very hard puncher. Just look at his fight prior to that John Ryder fight. It was against Hassan Endam, and he stopped Endam in the 3rd. Just before that, he fought George Groves in the finals of that World Boxing Super Series, and he stopped George Groves in the 7th round. So Callum Smith is a very hard hitter, pretty good boxer, tall fighter. He was extremely tall for 168, 6'3". And after losing to Canelo Alvarez, which I still see as being one of Canelo's best wins, Callum Smith then went to light heavyweight. He's had 2 fights there against Lenin Castillo and against Matthew Bartalik. He knocked both of those guys out badly. Like Lenin Castillo, he knocked him out in the 2nd round, and Castillo has fought some other good light heavyweights. Castillo is not a total slouch. Lenin Castillo went the full distance against Marcus Brown. He went the full distance against Dimitri Bivol. Callum Smith knocked him out in the 2nd round, and he was stiff on his back with his legs shaking, like his body was spazzing. He got knocked out so badly by Callum Smith. So in Callum Smith's 2 light heavyweight fights, you wonder if he was doing his body a disservice by sweating down all the way to 168 for as long as he did. But he's looking like he's very comfortable at light heavyweight. So when I size up Artur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith, well, you know, these guys had this fight scheduled several months ago, but it was postponed because Artur Beterbiev had some sort of infection in his jaw. And I was wondering, is this like a tooth issue? Is this a I got hit in sparring and my jaw is decaying issue? But he seems to be over it, or at least reportedly is over that. And so here we are, Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. And again, I wonder if this is a trap fight for Artur Beterbiev. I would not be totally shocked if Callum Smith pulls off this upset. Now, the betting odds are, okay, Beterbiev is the favorite, but he's not a huge favorite. He's like a 4-1 favorite here. So it's not lopsided odds-wise. So the betting public sees Callum Smith as being a viable opponent and kind of a live dog in this one. I see it as the same way. Now, the fight that I'm going to point to look at as like a measuring stick, it's not the Marcus Brown fight. It's not the Joe Smith Jr. fight, but it's more so the Gvozdyk fight. Now, Gvozdyk, in my opinion, didn't have the power of Callum Smith, but he was a better mover than Callum Smith. He was more a well-rounded boxer than Callum Smith, but he didn't have the same one-punch thump as Callum Smith. And again, Gvozdyk had a lot of early to mid-round success against Artur Beterbiev. What I'm wondering is, what style of fight Beterbiev is going to fight against the taller Callum Smith? Beterbiev is 6 foot flat. Callum Smith is 6'3". Callum Smith has that, 3-inch height advantage, but an even greater reach advantage. Artur Beterbiev has a 73-inch reach. Callum Smith has a 78-inch reach. So Beterbiev is going to have to do something to get inside Callum Smith's range to throw those short punches, because Artur Beterbiev isn't a long range puncher. He's a mid to short range puncher. Callum Smith can knock you out at long range. So I don't know what Beterbiev is planning to do. I don't know if he's going to try to get Callum Smith to come to him, or if he's going to find a way to attack and to infiltrate Callum Smith. But if I'm Callum Smith, I would certainly try fighting a back foot style fight. Make the shorter Beterbiev come to you and try to get Beterbiev to walk into something big. I've seen Callum Smith knock people out with his left hook. I've seen Callum Smith knock people out with his straight right. So I'm really interested to see how this one plays out. Like, what is the jab battle gonna look like? I know that Callum Smith, he likes to kind of feint, change levels, throw the jab. He likes to kind of work on that, distance game. Beterbiev isn't always a fast starter. I mean, he got Joe Smith Jr. out of there early, but that was because it was Joe Smith Jr. who was kind of head over skis coming after Artur Beterbiev and trying to make it a firefight. Callum Smith is a lot more patient than that. So I could actually see Callum Smith winning some of these early rounds, which will just build up the intensity. So how well can Beterbiev take a clean Callum Smith power punch? To me, that's an open question here. And again, Beterbiev is now 38 years old, and he's been, I mean, again, stopping all of his opponents. Let's get that clear. But he's been having some difficult fights against very good fighters, Anthony Yarde, Marcus Brown, Gvozdyk. But I think he's going to have to walk through some fire here. I think he's going to get blasted a few times by Callum Smith. But at 38 years old, can he sustain the pressure and keep his foot on the gas and start outworking and breaking Callum Smith throughout the middle and late rounds? I don't know that. And can he do it in a way where he doesn't get blasted by Callum Smith and put on his back? He was able to outwork Anthony Yarde, but Anthony Yarde, while he is a fast puncher and a hard puncher, I don't look at Anthony Yarde as being as like sweet science or technical as Callum Smith. Keep in mind, Anthony Yarde was outboxed by Lyndon Arthur. Lyndon Arthur is a good technical boxer. Again, I see Callum Smith as being a pretty good, maybe not as technical as Lyndon Arthur, but I mean, I would probably favor Callum Smith over Lyndon Arthur, but it's more so because of his power than his technique. But Callum Smith is a pretty technical boxer. I expect Artur Beterbiev to have some real problems in this one. He's going to have to take some fire. He's going to have to make this as much a firefight as he can. I don't think he's just going to flat out cleanly outbox Callum Smith. He's going to have to outwork Callum Smith. And Callum Smith has youth on his side. But it's so hard to bet against Artur Beterbiev. Again, I would not be surprised by an upset here. And I was a little bit tempted to just go for it and take Callum's, like betting odds wise, you might want to go with those 4-1 odds and bet on Callum Smith. But I'm just saying, in terms of my prediction, I was thinking about going Callum Smith, but Artur Beterbiev does tend to strategize more than he's given credit for. Again, he really threw a curveball in that Joe Smith fight, because I think that people thought that it was going to be like the Clash of the Titans where both guys come forward. But again, it was Artur Beterbiev who was using the whole ring and moving laterally, moving around, and then finding times to plant and fire. Callum Smith isn't going to chase Beterbiev like that. Again, I think that he would be prudent to take a step back and let Beterbiev come to him. But I still think that Beterbiev, whether it's through feinting, whether it's through doubling up with the same hand, and by the way, Callum Smith can double up with the left hook, and he can, again, throw a mean straight right. But when I say doubling up with the left hook, like if you look at Callum Smith's fight, his very latest fight where he stopped Bouterleek, it was doubling up on the left hook that dropped Bouterleek. If Beterbiev comes in and he's looking to kind of anticipate Callum Smith's punch pattern, thinking that Callum Smith is going to go left, right, Callum Smith, in doubling up with the left hook, can really do harm to Beterbiev, as Beterbiev is being the aggressor. And I think that Beterbiev will have to be the aggressor. I think Beterbiev is going to have to walk Callum Smith down in the way that he walked Gvozdyk down. But there's, again, a different level of danger trying to walk Callum Smith down, even though Canelo Alvarez was able to do it down at 168. Let's also be clear about that. I think Beterbiev is going to find a way to do it. I think that he's going to do more work and outblast Callum Smith, but I don't think he's going to get the stoppage here. I'm going to take Beterbiev to win this one, but I think that Callum Smith is going to be the first fighter to take Artur Beterbiev the 12-round distance. So I'm going to go Beterbiev via unanimous decision over Callum Smith. How is he going to walk him down? I don't know, but it's going to involve him taking some real shots. He's going to have to show his beard in this one. But between the success that Canelo had and the success that John Ryder, who's significantly shorter than Beterbiev, but the success that John Ryder had in coming forward against Callum Smith, I think Beterbiev could do the same thing, but even better. But I still don't think that he'll get the stoppage over Callum Smith. He might knock him down, but I do have a lot of respect for Callum Smith's durability. And I think that Beterbiev is going to have to settle for a decision win in this one. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on Artur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. You know, I'm actually pulling for Beterbiev in this one because I want to see Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol. But I do think that there's a decent chance that Callum Smith can upset this whole Beterbiev versus Bivol hope that we boxing fans have. But I'm going to take Beterbiev via decision in this one. Let me know your thoughts on this one. And if Beterbiev does get past Callum Smith, do we finally get Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol? And does it require Saudi involvement? I say it does. I mean, they're making boxing fans' dreams come true. I don't know what it means for boxing in the long run as a boxing business, because again, they're just throwing money at stuff that doesn't necessarily produce a profit. I haven't seen their books, so I don't know how these events are doing on a profit versus loss standpoint. But I know that other promoters haven't been able to get Beterbiev versus Bivol done. So I do think that it's going to take Saudi involvement. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this one between Beterbiev and Callum Smith in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.